So I think I probably didn't do a good job of introducing Rogier. So I think I'd like to allow you, introduce yourself, because there's so many amazing things about this man here that I probably am not spotlighting well.
Well, it's always hard to introduce yourself, I guess. But my name is Rogier Ten Kate. I'm Dutch, and my cultural background is all over the world, right? It's like I don't call myself a Dutch person anymore. I try to call myself more of a kind of like a global citizen, if you want to call it that. I know it's a bit of a buzzword that's been going around, but I've lived all over the place. I've lived in the United States for a while. I've lived in Switzerland, in Belgium, in Holland. My parents used to live in Indonesia. And with that, I got to be exposed to a lot of different cultures. And we moved to Canada probably 15 years ago, almost 15 years, me and my wife, together with 2 small kids. And we've settled here now in Canada. And the weird thing is now that I'm a bit half Canadian. I don't want to say I am Canadian, but my kids are actually full Canadian. My son just recently became a Canadian. He's over 18 now, so he made that choice himself, which is quite interesting to also live now in a multicultural family, because my wife and I are Dutch. My youngest son is Dutch. My oldest son is Canadian now. I don't know what my youngest son is going to do, but so eventually I don't know where it's going to go, but that's my personal life and my work life. I've been at Durham College now for about almost 7 years now.
Oh, that's amazing.
And I'm not an educator by trade. I've always worked internationally. I've always worked for companies that had international ventures. And with that, I got to travel quite a bit, right? So when I came to Canada, I started doing the teaching thing, which was quite interesting. And I love it until today, right? So I'm not thinking about switching yet. So I'll stay what I do. And hopefully I can teach a lot about culture in my classes to students, right?
You mentioned your name. So in terms of your name like carries a certain cultural weight. Can you tell us, does it have a special meaning or a story behind it? Like, or is there any connection in that for you?
No, I don't really know if it means anything. There's no significant meaning to it. My mother is a classical opera singer, so I grew up with classical music. And there is a Dutch guy in Holland. His name is Rogier van Otterlo, and he. And for that reason, I think she was like, okay, we're getting a second son, so might as well give him the name Rogier, right? So it doesn't have a specific meaning in the Netherlands. Every language has their own forms of pronunciation, right? I mean, you have it in your language too. If you really go to your own language, you start to listen to what it is. It's like it's very specific to your own way that you grew up, and when you're born and raised in a certain country, that it's how everybody speaks, right? So it becomes very natural. But we have certain letters in Holland which are pronounced almost like, I'm sorry to say, but it feels like we're spitting. So it's the G is in Arabic you have it too, right? The G's in the hard languages, you have that too. But it's almost like a scraping of your voice, right? And then we have the rolling letter, so the R's is a R. So try to say that in full, and then if you're not used to it, it becomes like a tongue twister. It's very, very challenging, right?
I'm never going to try. But maybe eventually I'll learn it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. The next question I have is,
Walter!
So how would you say, from what you've mentioned, you have a very diverse background.
Mm-hmm.
So how would you say your cultural heritage and your background has shaped your perspective on learning and collaboration?
What do you mean with that? The learning and collaboration of me as an individual or me as a culture?
You as an individual.
How my culture has shaped that?
Yes, like how your cultural heritage and your experiences up until now has shaped that.
I think in terms of culture, the thing that I find interesting about the Dutch and being Dutch and growing up as a Dutch person is that we're like a speck on the world map, right? We're very, not saying insignificant, but we're very small, right? We take up a very small piece of the earth, and there is 14, 15, 16 million people living there. And that's it, right? We fit into Canada over 300 times, right? We fit into the one big lakes that are here. Like I think a Superior Lake, actually the size of Holland fits right into that lake. And that's where we have 14, 15, no, it's actually more now. It's 18 million people that live there, right? So it's very insignificant. So the only reason that I grew up with that culture was that we were almost forced to look outside of the country instead of inside the country. Right? What you see here, I find in North America sometimes, and especially the United States, I've lived in America for a little while, is that you get so informed about the national news that you don't hear what's going on in the other parts of the world, right? And that's something if you're in the United States, you learn what's happening in the United States, or even in certain states itself, right? Not the whole United States. If you live in Holland, of course there is local news or national news, but the majority of the news is outside of Holland. So we get automatically exposed to everything that happens in Europe, everything that happens in the United States, everything that happens in Asia, because our world is so small that we automatically look outside, right? So I think that really influenced me to be focused outward and not inward.
So when at what age did you first leave your country, and when did you know you wanted to to explore the world?
When I first was that by myself, like with my family, because I started traveling with my family when I was like 3-4 years old, right?
But so as an individual, like when did you like I'd say make the first purchase? Like when was it like fully in your control?
I think the first really exposure to another country where I was by myself was when I went to high school. I went on an exchange for a year to go to high school in the United States. So I was 15 and a half, probably 15. I was not 16 yet, so I was in my 15. And my parents thought it would be smart for me to grow up a little bit faster. And they said, well, you're in between schools. Why don't you just go to the States for a year? And they put me into a school with some people that they knew. And this was in North Carolina, Charlotte, North Carolina. And I went to school there for almost a year, right? And I was 16 years old. I had to figure it out myself. And
at that point in time, was that the first time you experienced? Would you say that was the first time you experienced? Would I say culture shock?
Well, because I was there for a longer duration, like I said earlier, right? If you go on holidays, and I went skiing in Switzerland and Austria, and you went on summer holidays to Greece, and you went to Italy, and you went all the places in the southern part of Europe where all the Dutch people go, right? So if you have a holiday season, everybody just pulls towards the south, towards the sun, and in the wintertime, they also go towards the mountains and the Alps, right? So it's a kind of like almost like a mass moving of people within the country itself. Nothing different that happens up here in Canada, right? So holiday seasons, people go in the wintertime to different places, and they go in the summertime, right? So that was more a holiday way, but in ways of holiday that you don't really get to understand what culture is about, because you go to some kind of campsite and you sit there and you go to the beach and you don't interact with the local people. You go to a restaurant, so you don't really experience what that culture is. In the United States, it was the first time that I was on my own. I had to figure out how to live with a family that I did not know, in a culture that I did not know, and had to go to a school that I did not know, right? Being 15, 16 years old, that was quite a bit of information. I mean, you're going through it now too, right? You're in a different country, you're in a different environment. This is not normal to you. This is foreign in some ways, and you got to relearn a lot of the things that you do. And some things that you have been doing work really well, and some things that you have been doing don't work really well, right? And that was my first lesson in the States. I was there probably for about 7 months, 8 months. And so it was the high school year that I was there. It was just interesting, right? It's like it made me realize a lot of things. It made me also grow up very, very fast. And after that, it was very difficult to settle back in, right? Because you've been exposed to something else, and then you go back and you're like, okay, now it's like, whatever happened here, I'm going to forget. You don't, right? It just it makes you a different individual.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Todd Mahar, eHarmony. How can I help you today?
Hi, I can't seem to leave a wink for someone. I don't know, is my page broken? Do I maybe have a broken page or?
I've never heard of that, but okay. You're trying to use your eHarmony account for the first time?
I am.
Okay, I'm looking at your profile. We have a pretty intricate matching algorithm. That's what distinguishes us from other online dating services.
Yeah, I like that. Actually, I'm just trying to leave a wink for one person. Cheryl Melhoff. She started in my division at work about a month ago, and I overheard her near the bagel saying she was on your site.
Okay, that's unique. But let me ask you, you left a lot of this stuff, like the been there, done that section. You left it blank.
Yeah, I think I skipped it.
Okay, well, you gotta help me out here, man. Don't skip stuff.
Okay, well, I haven't really been anywhere noteworthy or mentionable.
Have you done anything noteworthy, mentionable? Hello? You still there?
Can you hang on a second?
Get out! Get out! She's gonna blow! Go! Go!
At that point, so when I was going through all these changes myself when I got here, I was really torn between like, okay, like, do I have to, really throw away all the things I've learned before now and become this whole new person? But one thing I think, okay, who is a cultural expert as well, the one thing I really loved that I mentioned was him saying, okay, so you have to understand that like these are two different places, and then you have to understand that like when you're in this place, you have to, function based on that place, and when you're back in Nigeria, you still function based on as a Nigerian. So you're not necessarily throwing one side away, but essentially you're making another version of yourself. They all come together at the same time, but it's actually a very interesting experience, I'd say, and it's something I think a lot of people should experience.
If I can add to that, the interesting thing I think with that is that as an individual you always develop and grow. Right, you always do. Like, I mean, if you were to stay back in Nigeria, you would have developed also, but you would have developed in a different way.
Yep.
The piece that is now added on top of it is the fact of the element that you are being not questioned, but you're questioning yourself to reflect on, okay, the way that I've been doing it, that worked back home.
Yep.
And now you're trying to do that here in Canada, and it might work, but there's a bit of a different response and reaction to what you do. And that's where you develop differently than when you would have stayed home.
Yep.
Right, so the culture piece that it kind of comes into that is where you start to almost redefine yourself, right, in some forms of way, and that's the reshaping of your mind and the reshaping of your customs and the way that you behave and the way that you react and the way that you interact with people, how you build friendships. It's at all levels, right? Yep. So try to build friendships with somebody from a different culture. Makes you also realize it's like, okay, the way that I was building my friendships with my Dutch friends, it's very different than the way that I'm building friendships here with Canadians, because their norms are different. The way that they interact is different. The way that you, literally, if I go to a dinner with some people, at their house, or we go to out somewhere, you always send a text within 24 hours thanking them for the lovely evening that you had together. Right? It's a custom. It's not something that is written somewhere, but it's a custom that they basically have here. And if you don't know about that builds almost the foundation of that friendship. So if you don't send a message, I'm not saying that is the automatic communication that you do, but if you don't send a message, for example, that does maybe put some pressure on the relationship itself, because now they think, well, maybe they didn't like it, or maybe they didn't enjoy it. Right? And for Canadians, it's very natural to do that. But for me, it's like, I mean, if I go out with some friends back in Holland, I don't send them a text in right? So those little things, those nuances, you don't notice when you're only in a country very short. Right? The longer you are here, you start to notice, like, oh, I think it's very customary, because it's not so much that I send them, it's actually I get the messages, right? So if I have some friends over to my house, I always get messages the next day. I'm like, okay, maybe this is something that they do. Everybody does that, right? So then you automatically try to adjust to that.
Empathy is like the biggest piece when it all comes together, because it really is like you described. It's realizing that there's so much out of like this little bubble that you think is your whole world that you've grown in, And the only way you can start to learn or start to even understand like all around you is by having an open mind, is by understand like being as empathetic as you can and being willing to learn. And that's very interesting.
But empathy is the core of everything, right? I mean, I think empathy is the core of human interaction, right? And if you really want to develop, I believe, in the piece of culture, it starts with, being empathetic to yourself. Understanding also that the way that you do things is great, but it's not the only way that things are being done, right?
Yep.
And being open that there are different ways of how people do things, and then want to learn from it, right? That I find it fascinating to see how people do things differently.
Yeah, me too.
And not to say that they do it well or bad or good or there's a judgment on it, but just to say like, wow, it's interesting why you do that, right? And a lot of times there's something behind it, whatever that is, that causes that effect, right?
I'm trying to understand that is a whole different ballgame, right? So it's like you said, it's very fascinating, and it's something that I think like had me very excited when I was coming here. Like it's something that like some people would be scared of, but I think it's a whole different ballgame, and once you start to get into it and start to understand it. So and funny enough, this actually segues perfectly well into my next question. So what sparked your, because I can tell you're very passionate about culture, about learning, and it's really amazing to see. So what sparked your passion for cultural intelligence and education? Like, was there a turning point in your career that led you to pursue this path? Where would you say it all began, and what sparked that passion?
I don't think I naturally focused on it. In my past career, I've always worked in marketing and sales jobs, right? And with that work, you automatically have to focus on very business-like. You have to focus on what does the customer want, right? And with customers, you always try to crawl or to kind of get a peek in their brain of why they make certain decisions or what is their decision-making process like, right? And that kind of triggered me when I was doing international business to figure out, it's like, okay, like, I mean, if I do it in Holland, my home country, I kind of understand it, right? At some point you start to read body language and you see how people responded, know, okay, it's going well or it's not going well. And if it's not going well, how can you change it, right? But internationally that didn't work, right? Because I was trying to figure out, it's like I was working with people in Switzerland or I was working with people in Spain, right? And you go in there and you go like, these people respond different, right? Because I'm trying to do the same thing, but they don't respond to what I'm doing. And in Holland they would say, hey, great. And here they go, maybe not. So then you had to almost reinvent the wheel and reinvent how people respond. So that was more that, I don't want to call it passion, but I'm just fascinated by why people do certain things and why they make certain decisions. And if they make a certain decision, is that something that you can influence? I'm not saying I want to manipulate them, but it's how can you influence people in their decision-making process? And having that kind of mindset is also opens up a door where you really start to explore. It's like, okay, why do you do certain things, and why is this a personality trait? The way that you react, is this a manual that is doing it, or is it some cultural piece that is pushing you to do certain things, right?
Yes.
It's incredibly challenging to distinguish that or to figure out, it's like, okay, is this a value that you hold, or is this a personality trait that you have? But the only way that you're going to find out is to be interested in the other person, and to have multiple interactions with an individual where you can start to identify and say, okay, you're now acting as Emmanuel, and now you're in certain situations, okay, you're acting as your culture, right? Or your culture acts this way.
Would you say that interest has to be there for anyone to really achieve any level of like cultural intelligence? Like, or is it something that's like that can be taught? Like, and it's funny because it's a very interesting, because I do agree with you that for you to even take that step, like you mentioned that like that's like, because it's something I also possess. Like, I'm always wondering, okay, why is this happening? Why is like, what is the reason for this? And I think it's one of the things that contributes to like me being very like culturally aware, me trying to understand about other cultures. So would you say in that moment that like, can culture be taught?
I don't think culture can be taught, because I mean, if you say culture, then they basically would say, okay, you get a definition of what a culture is, and then everything would apply to it. But a culture is fluid, right?
Exactly.
It's not a fixed kind of thing. This is a culture. Like we've worked with models like Hofstede, and it's an amazing model that translates the values underneath it, and it gives a number to it. But the number is not a fixed number. The number fluctuates, right? It moves around, and it moves very slightly, but it moves around, right? So I think you can teach the openness and awareness for different cultural aspects.
Interesting.
But again, it's the same as like if you ask yourself, can you teach me empathy?
That's the dilemma.
Okay, can you teach me that?
I think empathy is such a core emotion that, like, and this is me personally, like, I find that, like, most of the people that I've seen are usually very empathetic. One is either they've had it, like, around them for a very long time, and they had a dad or they had a sibling or someone that was just had that core trait in them that they sort of mirrored it, or they've been through some traumatic experience that forced them to see beyond themselves. So I find it hard to answer that question because it's something I'm not sure of, if empathy can truly be taught or if it's something that one finds for themselves.
Oh, but I think it lies in the same line with, can you teach culture, right? I think you can teach the understanding of culture and the differences between it, but to really create a passion for it, or to I don't think anybody has a passion for it. It's just like I think it's more human psychology that we're talking about than culture almost.
Okay, I think I get
It's like if I am very open to learn about you as an individual, or anybody in the school about an individual, or that I encounter in a business setting, right? It's more, am I interested in learning more about this individual? And then as soon as that is open, part of that is, I also want to learn a little bit about your culture and how that affects what decisions you make.
Okay, I think I'm understanding, like, the piece here. So it's like it's living that perspective of like seeing culture from, like, a general standpoint, but seeing it from like an actual individual, and, like, you being interested in learning about that individual. And that's very interesting.
It's and again, I don't have all the knowledge, right? I just I give you my interpretation of what I think how culture works. But when you look at, for example, have you ever done those like personality tests?
Yes, I have.
So you MBTI, you got the colors, you got personal dimensions, whatever. You got a whole bunch of these. Right? So let's take, for example, MBTI, which is the Young Type Indicator, right? So it's done by Young, a psychologist that looked at it. He basically gives you a label, and the label doesn't define you, but the label does give you some indications on what your natural responses are, right? Are you an introvert or an extrovert? And an introvert-extrovert doesn't mean that extroverts talk and introverts don't. That has nothing to do with it. It's where you get your energy sources from, right? And naturally, if you get into a stress situation, you will act as your type, right? So if you are an extrovert, then you will seek out others for their opinion to form your own. That's your first reaction, right? If I'm in a stress situation, I'm an extrovert, I automatically will go and talk to people, because that's where I get input from and get energy from. Introverts, the only thing that they do different, they still go through the same mental process. The only thing that they do is that they will revert back to, okay, I'm going to incorporate this internally first, see what I think about, and then they communicate outward. So there's a little bit of a delay in that communication. That's why they are considered to be quiet, right? But in general, they do the exact same thing as extroverts, and then an extrovert do the exact same thing as introverts, except we do it quicker, right? Extroverts compared to introverts, but the process is exactly the same. So what I mean with that is, when you look at those types, those are exactly they not define who you are, but they give an indication of how you will respond, and your culture does exactly the same. If you are in and that's where Hofstede, I think, becomes really interesting. When you look at, for example, individualism and collectivism, or the we culture and the I culture that we talk about. If you come from an I culture, like most of the northern part of the world actually comes from, they all tend to focus more on themselves before they focus on people around them. Right? Is that good or bad? No judgment, right? Yep. If you come from a culture like Nigeria, like India, like Philippines, like large parts of South America, they are more we culture oriented, so family oriented. So family comes first. So any decisions that they make, any evaluations that they make, are based on those family values. So it's not I anymore, it's we.
Yeah, very true.
So that's your first inclination. If you get into a stress situation, what do? You go back to your cultural values, and that's where you start to respond from. So is it something that you can teach? I don't know. It's in you, right? It's like I can't get it out you. You can't get it out of me, right? It's very challenging.
It's very interesting. It's very, very interesting.
And the thing, and we've discussed this many times, right? It's that difference. If you go in with a mindset where you find comfort in stereotyping and saying, I put a label on this individual or a label on you, and everybody like you in Nigeria responds the same, right? All Nigerians do this. That's a very negative approach to it, right?
Yep.
And with that, you close off your mind for any opportunity, whatever you do, that my mind is going to be open for, that what Nigerians do is going to be driven by something positive or something that will open up doors that will lead to maybe other pieces that are interesting to me. But stereotypes close that off, right?
Very true.
So it's a very negative. So to me, empathy and generalization are very closely related to each other. If you can think in terms where I don't have a judgment about how you do things, and I'm using Nigeria as an example because that's your heritage, right, or your background, that if I'm not interested in what happens in Nigeria, I can never be interested in you as a person, right? So that automatically closes that door. So if you want to train empathy, it starts with being open for that perspective, that a generalization is probably a much more, if you want to use growth mindset, like more of a mindset where you can open up things instead of closing things down when you use a stereotype and you just put a label on, okay, everybody's the same, right?
Yep.
And I think that's a bit of the starting foundation of where you look at when you really look at developing empathy, right? But I cannot teach you empathy. I can only offer you what empathy has. And then with empathy is a starting point where you can start to learn what culture is all about.
That is a kick-ass bend there.
Todd, I'm gonna keep this short. I have to make oxygen choices.
Oh, hey, I get it. Go. Anyway, you have a profile now. Congratulations.
Cool, but you know what? Would you take me off? I can't really swing that $500 yearly.
Hey.
Whoa. Well.
Hey, man.
You're sure? Because I feel like we're really onto something here.
You mind?
And this is.
I'm working.
I mean, this is one of the best profiles I've ever done, and our refund policy. Well, you know, we don't have one. That's the
Todd, I gotta go.
what
I have a very interesting question. How do you teach cultural intelligence? How do you teach cultural intelligence to people that haven't left where they are or aren't living anytime soon? Yes, like you said, we're becoming more globalized. You know, these things might come to them sooner than later. Yeah. But how do you like teach this, or how do you teach it to people that haven't have been in one place all their lives, that only know that's one thing or their own culture?
Yeah. Well, there needs to be a certain drive too, and a certain necessity to be able to adapt to other cultures, right, or to learn about other cultures. I say in the beginning, when I try to teach it, or when we try to get everybody to understand what culture means, I try to get them to look first at themselves, right? It's you first have to look at yourselves and try to identify what your own cultural values is that you can recognize, and for immigrants, it's actually easier to recognize what their cultural values are than when you're in your own country. And what I mean with that is that it's a real stupid analogy, but if you ask a fish about the water, it doesn't know what the water is, right? Because that's what he's breathing. So immigrants have a special opportunity because they're actually stepping out of their own culture, and now they look back at their own culture and they see what we do or what you do, right? If I go to Holland and people have the stereotype where they say the Dutch are rude or the Dutch are they're just aggressive, right? Or whatever terms they have for the Dutch. That's translated into direct communication in Holland. And for us, it's an efficiency, right? We communicate directly because we want to make sure that we get our point across, and that has some kind of efficiency in our language and also an efficiency in our economy and our society, right? As soon as you step out of that, and I become a Canadian, where the communication is much more gentle, much more polite for me in a sense, I look at the Dutch and go, gosh, you guys are rude, eh?
Yeah, okay.
Right? So as soon as you step out of the culture, you start to realize what you actually do. And that's the first part. So when I look at cultures, I always try students or myself to reflect on, okay, what do I do, right? So if I communicate with you, how do I communicate that might have an effect on how you respond, right? And you can only do that if you have a bit of a picture of yourself, what you do, and that they call it the self-reference, right? So what's your own lens that you see the world through? The more you start to recognize what your lens is, so why you do certain things, why the way that you communicate is part of your culture and not so much the part of who you are, but it's culturally driven. Once you start to recognize those, that is the first starting point to identify and see, okay, how far apart are you from another culture?
So
if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. So for what I'm trying to say, I'm hearing is there's a level of self-awareness to it, like that you would say that is even the first starting point. Yep. Interesting.
So and really next to that, okay, now I understand who I am, comes empathy, right? So the empathy piece is the second piece. Because if I go in and say the way that the Dutch do it is the best way to do it, right? Okay, now we have a discussion. So everything that you do is like, okay, you're not doing it my way, so I'm going to try to get you to do it my way, right? So the whole communication is almost creates a forcefulness in it and takes it away. So empathy is the second part that I'm saying, okay, the way that I do things, I'm not going to judge it, but empathy is going to make that a little bit softer, where you're going to say, okay, the way that I do things, it's only one way that you can get a solution. I want to be open for that, or I want to put myself in somebody else's shoes and learn why they do certain things. And now I also, when I do that, I understand how far apart are we, right? Whether it's through religion, or the way that you were educated, or the way that you grown up, or the other values that you hold, right? So if I'm very far away from you, we know we might need to start working on how do we get closer together, right? But you can only do that if you know where you are, and from an empathy perspective, you know how far away I am from somebody else.
Interesting. That actually explains the self-reference, right? Yeah, interesting. Like, wow, those are two very core skills that I personally think is losing value, or like is being lost in our current day and age. Or what do you think with the current? And this is just a question I'm throwing out there, with the current social media trends, with how things are going. Would you say that people are becoming more self-aware and people are becoming more empathetic to each other, or it's going the other way around?
I know it's an interesting point you make there. It's I'm going to sound like an old guy now. But I find the texting and social media, it doesn't communicate the message.
Mm-hmm.
It communicates a message, but it doesn't communicate the most important message, right? If you really look at communication, the majority of communication is done through body language. It's not done through voice or to videos or stuff like that, right? It's the actual body language and the interpretation of the body language where you really start to feel and experience what people are thinking, right? And I find sometimes that with social media, it becomes, or with texting, or the uncomfortness of having a personal one-on-one conversation with somebody, we're actually alienating each other, right? We're not really focused on the other individual anymore.
Mm-hmm.
We're focused more on how can I almost persuade you, or how can I influence you in some form of a way with text situations or with little videos, or it's an image that we're now portraying. We're not actually looking at what the actual inherent kind of like messages are that we try to learn, right? And that's I find that sometimes with and again, I don't want to sound like an old guy, but
old is gold, please.
It's
Old is gold.
It makes it very, very challenging. Right, and I'm very happy with tools like I do a lot of my communication with other cultures via MS Teams or Zoom, right? Those kind of like messages where you don't see the full body of a person, but you see the facial expressions, right? And they say a lot, right? And through that you can also learn a lot from somebody else. But nowadays, a lot of the younger generation that I meet, they're very afraid to pick up a phone and actually talk with somebody on the phone, right? To have a conversation. If they do jump on Zoom calls or whatever it is professionally, they don't put their videos on, right? So there's a lot of like missed signals, I think, in communication that's being lost.
I agree.
And the current technology is not really supporting that, right? I mean, talk about gamification, one of your topics that you have in there, right? 99% of the communication that's being done is you talk with each other, of course, and a lot of it is texting, right? Discourse and all the other channels that you have, it's all like quick messages that you throw on there. But there's a lot of nuances that are lost in those communications that can teach you a lot about culture, right?
Yeah, I agree, and it's funny because I think this is something that the pandemic in a way showed us like how like the effects can be, and now I've seen it manifest in a different way because that like very thing the pandemic taught us is the importance of that human connection that you just mentioned, right? That's how you really there's nothing realer than you actually face to face actually communicating with someone where you can see their expressions, you can bounce off of them, and you can feel that genuine connection.
Take your time, settle in, try to be real still, okay? There's a snow leopard right in this ridge. So we have to try to be very, 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 very still. We call the snow leopard the ghost cat. It never lets itself be seen. Ghost cat. Beautiful things don't ask for attention. How'd you find me anyway? My mom. Cool lady. Knows how to bake. Yeah. Hey, why did you... When are you gonna take it? Sometimes I don't. If I like a moment, me, personally, I don't like to have the distraction of the camera. I just want to stay right here. Now let's go. Let's go. That looks like fun. I think I'm gonna jump in.
Hey, what was the picture, Sean?
We're gonna be odd numbered if you don't join.
The weird thing is that if you visit a country, you don't actually meet the culture, right? It depends on how you visit the country, right? It's if you travel around and you're there for business, you don't actually get to meet the culture because you're just in and out, right? Within a week, you don't learn what the culture is all about. When you immigrate, like we have, and you're in the same boat, right? So you're immigrating now. Then you start to really experience what culture is all about. So you get to the deeper levels. Like, you know, if you're a tourist and you visit a culture, you don't really feel what the elements are.
Very
right?
true. How do you think we can, you know, move into this next phase of I'd say technology that we're about to enter, while still being very, you know, very aware, while still nurturing these very, very important, you know, traits that leads to cultural intelligence?
I think what we shouldn't forget, you know, for me, the AI, I love AI, but it's a tool, right? It's a mechanism that we can use to enhance our productivity and become much more efficient in what we do, right? For me, that is how I use it. That's how I try to use it. I don't see it as a replacement. I see it as an additional tool. So in terms of culture, you can use it in the same way, right? If you ask AI to help write proposals, or even strategies on how to communicate with somebody, right? You can ask AI to adopt and incorporate the cultural elements into the communication that it gives back to you, right? So within the prompting, you take in elements that take cultural sensitivity into consideration. And that's where it gets really powerful, right? Because now you're going to get, if you ask it normally, can you write me an email because I got to ask this client, blah, 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 right? You have a whole story that you want to achieve with the client. If you now insert into that prompt also elements where you ask it and say, the client is from a different culture. The client is from a culture where family orientation is really high. There is a hierarchy structure that is in place. There's other elements that you can bring in from that cultural piece that will make the quality of what AI is going to give back incredibly a boost, right? It's going to give it an incredible boost. And that's where I think cultural intelligence will never leave. We still need to understand what the cultural sensitivities are, but we need to start using AI and all the tools that we have to incorporate some of that cultural intelligence that we have into what we ask, for example, the tools like AI to do for us.
So it's really like changing the perspective on how we use these tools and understand that it's not yet to replace, but how can we, you know, really be very creative about how we learn from it, how we leverage it, and how we, you know, use it to adapt to our current, like, you know, landscape.